Hello. Just laughing. Hello. I have my iPad vertically because I don't want to look down here the entire time to see myself.
And I have my audio off, so you can hear me. I think.
Let's hope. Or it's just me, and that's all you really need to hear, right? Let's be honest.
So it normally turns up this is us.
Yeah.
We are on the right Zoom link.
We have to be. It's on my iCal. Okay.
So we've had this conversation many times before about recording devices.
Mm-hmm.
Were you there when we were having the long conversation about this?
Yes.
Yeah, which we didn't record.
Yeah.
But now we might have to do it all over again.
It's a learning process, right? You just learned about AirPods for the first time today.
It's not that I didn't know that they existed.
You were so baffled by the fact I didn't have a cord. I was like, I have these. Technology.
Is it like Bluetooth or something?
I'm using my Indian wisdom and magic to connect them to the Apple devices. Yeah, no, I use them for everything. They're so convenient and accessible.
Are there moments when you're talking to someone and you're listening to them?
Constantly. Or I always forget because these ones have like sound cancellation capabilities. So I'll forget that like I have them in and I just think I've gone deaf, right? Because they're so like light. And I'm just like, oh, I have them in. And I'm like, there's a whole new world out here. So you need to get them.
That's true.
You need to get them.
Well, I mean, this one is meant to be like a non-tangled thing.
It's beads.
But it's beads.
That's awesome. You could do your meditations with them.
Like rosaries.
Yeah. No, like one of my, like Dr. San Pedro, incredible professor, he uses a whole headset like thing with the microphone, and it looks insane, but it's also like you can hear him because the microphone's right there.
Yeah.
So it's really nice. Yeah.
I like that.
Yeah. I mean, I have like my wireless headphones that I use all the time when I be working like really aggressively, which they have a microphone, but it's not good.
Mm-hmm.
So
It really is just a...
Hey, I mean, sure. This is my champion hoodie that I did not dye myself. Way overpriced, but comfy. Fall weather. Absolutely. We're matching yet again. Last time we met, we both had maroon and black on. And now we have this kind of pinky white sensation happening.
If no one else to say, I don't need to have these. I just suddenly realized that.
Get back into your body, Richard. Where are you? Who are you?
So this shirt, Rebecca brought me this shirt.
I love it.
Spain.
Yeah.
It's from Pacific.
Oh.
And this is also.
You always wear that. What is that from?
It's by Spike Winkler.
Okay.
And he did a series of badges and pins. And this is based on a mound.
Oh.
Whose name I've forgotten. I just posted about it.
Was it the one that you visited? No.
No, I haven't visited this one. But he has other ones too. But yeah, I just love it.
It's pretty.
And these are stones on the shirt.
I thought they were like prescription pills for a second.
I thought you might thought they were jelly beans.
No.
I thought they were jelly beans.
No, because in Vegas, there's like a suite with Damien Hirst, and the whole room is like prescription pills and like acrylic or something. Mm-hmm. There's also like butterflies around to be like a children's hospital. And then there's the dead animals, extribute animals in there too. I hate that man. Sorry if anybody out there likes him, but he stresses me out and makes me sad.
Can I tell you a story about my childhood?
With Damien Hirst?
Yeah.
I'm afraid.
So,
yeah.
When I was a teenager, like probably like 30 years ago,
mm-hmm.
from right now. No, a bit later. So like,
mm-hmm.
I was friends with a guy whose dad was the director of the British Museum.
Okay.
Okay. So he basically lived in the British Museum.
Wow.
And it was kind of crazy.
Yeah.
You know, I only think I stayed over at his house like once or moment when I was introduced to him where he was like, hello, I am this person. And I went, hello, I'm Richard. Like, I put on his voice. And he like, I think he whispered like something rude under his breath, which is fair enough, because I was being an annoying teenager.
Yeah.
Anyway, through his dad, some journalist from like the Telegraph or something wanted to get young people's perspective on the Sensation exhibition. There was like the major exhibition of young British artists where Damien has had his show.
Right.
And I remember this feeling of like, I mean, I was like 14, something like that. And I didn't really, I didn't know much about contemporary art at that point. And, I was walking around this thing. My sister is an artist, she's a filmmaker. And so therefore I had some, and my dad was kind of into art too. But I remember like being very kind of like, whatever this is. But then when I was confronted by the shark, you know the title of that work?
No, I know what yeah, anyway.
The title of the work is like the impossibility of understanding death in the mind of the living. And like, as someone like, pretentious teenager, I was like, oh, that's kind of interesting. This work I don't get, except the title I get. And I get the title in relation to the work. Like, can I not understand the shark is dead because I'm alive? Or can I, like that kind of, I started to think through it. I've got no idea what happened with the article, but we went around with this kind of, but otherwise, Damien has, no interest in Damien's work. That horrendous thing in Venice, the Venice Biennale, like, was it like wonders from the shipwreck thing?
Something like that.
At this moment when the art world was kind of like, let's not do this complete crazy spectacle thing.
Right.
He was doing, hey, let's do this crazy spectacle.
Right. And still does crazy spectacle thing. I just, I have like, I don't know if it's like a phobia, but like of taxidermied animals, and I have a massive phobia of it. And so like, I think it's just because like, obviously that happened to a lot of native bodies, right? We were for museums for, the early 19th century and all that, or whatever, 1900s. And so like seeing that, like I went to the Carnegie Museum or whatever. Yeah, because we went to the Andy Warhol Museum.
Yeah.
And I was like I said, I'm not going to like the natural museum part because I don't want to see any fossils or whatever they are calling fossils. I'll go to the art part. And so I was like walking around on my own because all my friends abandoned me, and like went up the stairs. And then I saw there was a taxidermied deer like facing like the entryway to the next part of the museum. And like the pure terror that like went through my body, and like anger, and like it was like every emotion. It was like such like a trauma activated, like I've been traumatized by seeing that. And I literally like just ran down the stairs, and like I went into like the lobby, and like I called my mom who was with my dad, and like trying to figure out like because I was having a massive panic attack.
You had no idea that you were going
to see, because you would think you're going to see just like random contemporary paint splatters everywhere, but like just to see that just add like decoration somewhere, like a dead animal's body that's gone through the whole process, me not being ready for it, it just freaked me out. And I had to call my mom to get her to calm me down, because my dad was alive then, so he was sick, but he could still communicate, and so he was trying to talk to me to get me to relax. And of course, like that's something that if I had something like that happen to me like in a space, one of them would have been there with me, right? Like that's like a childhood thing, right? So I was like, I am in a different city I've never been to before. I can't leave because I came here on a bus with this for a school trip for undergrad, and now I have to sit here and just exist because I am so scared to even enter another room again, because what if they have more of those of different animals around? Like that's gross, right? And so I mean, of course, I always think of like medicine, and like I'm seeing bodies there, and I treat animals with whatever respect and all that. But
where does taxidermy even fit into like very ignorant question, but like within a basic general indigenous worldview, like how can taxidermy
I think it's like the most colonial thing you can do, because you're preserving a living thing versus using every single piece for a purpose. And then the fact that they even apply that to human, not just native, but like Black bodies and all these other bodies, like that's a practice that didn't end not too long ago. And it's still happening with animals now because humans are off limits now for some people, you know?
The idea that there's that continuity of colonial action.
Keeping them, imposing them, and doing all that stuff too.
Yeah.
You know, like I saw one where, I mean, I didn't see it. There's someone here. Oh my God, Michelle, I'm talking about taxidermy. But like, it was just gross. But people didn't know how to respond to it because they're just used to it.
Yeah.
You know.
Hello, sorry for my tardiness. How is everybody?
It's us.
It's just us, okay.
And we're recording, so we've been doing the Indigo Richard show. Can you hear me okay? Because I'm using Indigo's audio.
I can barely hear you. Let me see. I'm turning you up a little bit.
I know it might be because it doesn't work.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, I get it'll.
Now it's like this.
Yeah, perfect.
We'll just
Either way is fine.
right.
I have you guys turned up, but yeah, no. I think this is a very busy time of the semester for everyone. We had a very successful webinar yesterday on the.
Oh, how did it go? Tell us about it, Michelle.
It was terrific. It was the launch of the Andean Violin Methods Manual. Center for Latin American Studies has been supporting the research and then also the design and publication of the book. And it was terrific. We heard from music educators, from the composer, you know, of many of the pieces and the method, and then various people that contextualized it in terms of the importance of the broader cultural context, highlighting that this area is incredibly diverse. So just in this one province, there's the potential for many, you know, volumes of this methods manual, because from one community to the next, the practices change. So it was very exciting to see the book, to hear the samples, to hear the speakers. Mika Unsueta, who is you've met here in the Our Unlearning Hour and is one of our student curators for the Andean and Amazonian Indigenous Arts Collection, was the simultaneous interpreter for the event, and he did a phenomenal job. So we're going to edit that video and post it so that we can disseminate it and people have access that didn't get to attend. We had 73 attendees.
Wow, that's brilliant.
Worldwide, yeah, exactly. So it was fantastic. And then, of course, immediately we're turning and pivoting toward our open house event. And let me see if I can pull this up. Let's see if I can find our little poster here really quick. So our open house event, it's called Tukuipak, which means for all. And we have several classes that are going to be visiting and multiple workshops.
I'm going to bring my class at 3 o'clock.
You are? Okay, good to know. How many people?
It will be 7.
7. Oh, fantastic. No, that'll be absolutely perfect.
Actually, so plus me, so it'll be 8. Yeah, and Amanda's in that class, so because I know that she couldn't help out because of the class. Kind of.
Right. So here's the poster, just to sort of share that with you. But that should be really, really terrific. And it is an open house that hopefully will become something of an annual event or possibly a semester event. We'll see kind of how it goes tomorrow. Also within a consortium of small collections on campus, working with the Humanities Institute to see if we can potentially have an open house for small collections at some point in the future, where we invite research deans and chairs and, you know, administrators to familiarize themselves with some of these unique research and teaching resources that we have at Ohio State. So we are really looking forward to it. It's been a lot of work. The curators have done a phenomenal job. We have been talking, I guess, with Richard a little bit about how interesting it is that the context of something that is not a class, that is project focused and, hello, Peter. Something that is project focused, activities based, collaborative, interdisciplinary, right? But that is not a class context and that is not necessarily for a grade. creates a forum that is incredibly generative, right? So the students in this curators group have been doing work above and beyond what students generally do in a class, you know, and kind of taking ownership of that work and feeling like it has an impact, not just, you know, for a classroom exercise, but like beyond with that public facing sort of perspective. So I think that it is definitely something for us to discuss, you know, as we think about learning and unlearning, you know, including different methodologies in our classrooms and restructuring, you know, in some ways in response to forums that are much more productive. So.
That's great. Welcome, Peter. Indigo and I are in the same space. We are in the reading room Potu Whaitau Tusi, which Anna may have spoken to you about, which is Indigo is one of the participating artists in the project. And so they selected books and are going to work on a print as part of the project. And so all the books behind us are books on Indigenous art and contexts. Oh, okay. And we're at this place called the Columbus Printed Arts Center, which is, so it's a functional arts print studio.
Oh, wow.
And yeah, and we were meeting today to record an episode of the Dear Fellow Settler Colonizer radio show. And we thought we would join this together, but we haven't got the audio right because now Indigo's got me in stereo in their headphones. And Peter's here. Peter's Anna Friedman's father. It's an educator.
Hi, Indigo. Nice to meet you.
And Michelle was just giving us an update on some of the activities of the group, including this exciting open house that we have next week. So.
I should mention that Anna is bringing her class, but she has been absolutely integral to the development of this open house. We had an interview with an interviewer from the Lantern, so there's going to be an article coming out. But something that came out in the responses to those questions was precisely that a lot of work went into the conceptualization. So before we even started placing pieces or labels or anything, we spent a lot of time just sort of thinking through how to bring in Indigenous meaning-making practices into the design of our cabinets. So Anna has been an amazing contributor to that discussion. The other exciting thing about that group is that there are undergraduates and graduate students, and then of course me as faculty. So there's a beautiful mentoring relationship that happens peer-to-peer, grad to undergrad, faculty to students, dynamic that we have going in the group, which we really celebrate. And again, Anna has been absolutely central to that. She is conducting interviews with Christine Ballingy Morris in the Arts Administration Education Policy Department that she had donated a collection of feather art from the Mato Grosso and Pará region of Brazil. It's a really special collection. Many museums cannot accept feather art because of various implications about their maintenance and also concerns about like any kind of bugs or things like that, you know. But we can, because we're not a museum, we're not a, you know, we can accept that. So she has been filling in a lot of that ethnographic information about the feather art by way of the interviews with Christine Ballingy Morris. And for us, it's also a way of honoring the donation and reassuring Christine that we are taking care of the items, you know, putting them to good use, linking them to curriculum, linking them to research. So we're very excited. Yeah.
That's great.
That's really interesting, Michelle. So Indigo and I were just talking about this project in relation to like the questions of kind of activation and questions of moving from just having books on the shelves to actually, you know, having events, and Indigo's thinking about like office hours and activities around the library. But how does in the Andean and Amazonian collection, how does it, you know, so if you're connecting to the people that have donated the pieces, then how does that then connect to the people that made the pieces? You know, how do you kind of tell the story that kind of moves back, you know, like keeps each stage of the story kind of present for those who visit? And there must be different stories obviously for different pieces. But yeah, and are there any kind of interesting methodologies that you're using to tell that in a kind of exhibition context or a museological kind of context?
Yeah, those are all really great questions because you're absolutely right. The information comes from different places, and we do different things, right? So in this case, Christine fills in information about where she acquired the pieces. You know, sometimes there are very personal stories connected to pieces that have been gifted or donated by the communities themselves for the purpose of education. Anna was particularly interested in Christine's background and personal story as someone who is of Indigenous descent as well. And she's connecting her work on this particular collection to the Toronto Biennial study abroad trip and exhibit. So that kind of goes multiple ways. We don't have, regarding the feather art, we don't have information directly connected to the artists, the makers themselves. So we kind of rely on Christine's information to fill in some of that ethnographic detail. In other cases, for instance, we have a storytelling tapestry by Santusa Quispe de Flores, and our undergraduate curators have been interviewing Mama Santusa and her son, Carlos, having a really amazing immersed experience via Zoom, you know, in terms of coming into that dialogue, into that context. The interviews have been bilingual in Quechua and Spanish. So the students are also prepared, you know, to some questions and conversation in Quechua. So there we have a very personal narrative that not only informs the storytelling of the tapestry, but also Mama Santusa's experience with other museums that have displayed her work, some of them positive, some of them not so positive. So it gives us an opportunity to ask her, how would she like her tapestry to be displayed? You know, what can we do with it? And then the other part of that is that Sue Kalt of Roxbury College is the director of a project called Yachay Shimi that works in Peru and Bolivia. And another one of our student curators has been working with Sue to create a children's book that goes in hand with the tapestry. And our student participated in the design, you know, of the book that combines image and words, a trilingual book, you know, that type of thing. So that's sort of in process. And the Yachay Shimi project, by way of the Yachay Shimi project, we also connect to the Aya archive at the University of Texas at Austin. And this is an Indigenous languages archive, like a very big archive that they house there. So that's kind of that. Some of our Amazonian, like Canelos Quichua, Ecuadorian Amazon pieces come from Norman Witten, who is the director. He's a curator at the Spurlock Museum. And also has been conducting fieldwork in the area for over 40 years. I don't know how many years, I've lost count at this point. He has detailed ethnographic information of working with the artist in a very direct way, in a sustained way, that he sort of collaborates with us, you know, on that. So we often tap him just to double check our information. You know, he's rigorous about that ethnographic detail. And it puts students basically in contact with an expert in the field beyond OSU. So creating those professional networks beyond the campus for our students, I think, is also important. One of our students is going to do her workshop station. When you asked about capturing, you know, like how do we capture these stories? She is working on a podcast. I think Indigo is going to be interviewed at some point for the podcast, but Hallie lost her voice last week, so had to postpone. But she's creating a podcast to sort of capture, some of those voices of the artisans and the makers themselves. Mika Unsueta is doing a workshop on Quechua language, so that connects the language he has a phenomenal workshop connecting the language to the collection. And then Emily Brokamp conceived of a community project, so that involves everybody sort of in the making of a big art project. And while they're doing it, curators will be circulating and kind of informing what exactly it is that people are participating in. And then we have several other students who have really dived into research. So Cameron Logar I can't even tell you how many books this kid is a reader. And he has read multiple books, just on his own, that sort of fill in a lot of the gaps. Amanda has participated in amazing ways, and Tamara McDermott. None of the open house could have happened without her support as our GA. Who am I missing? We have a couple of students who have graduated, but that continue to work with us. So that's really fantastic. Yeah, so sorry, kind of went a little bit long there, but just sort of a long answer to the question. This open house is basically the fruition of work that we've been putting into the collection since 2015, I think is when we started it. So the work of previous curators is acknowledged there as well as we sort of build on what they started.
And the open house starts next week, right?
Yes, it's on Tuesday. So
Tuesday.
yeah.
Oh, is it only one day?
It's only one day. Mm-hmm.
Wow.
Yep.
How many people do you think will go through?
Good question. So we have been navigating the logistics of just putting on a big event,
Yep.
but also navigating the logistics of COVID sort of protocols,
Yep.
contact tracing and things like that. We have 3, and now with Richard, 4 classes. So we have 3 classes that are about 25 students each, and we're dividing them into smaller groups so that they can circulate in smaller groups. And then we have open kind of like self-guided tours during some parts of it, so that public can sort of circulate. So we have public from different places on campus that will also be coming by. So all in all, I think we're going to have a couple of hundred people over the course of the day, maybe 150, maybe. I don't know.
That's pretty good in a COVID environment to have to socially distance and.
That's why we did the long hours, like 1 to 6, so that we can kind of parse it out a little bit.
Yeah.
And then Mark Stansberry, who has been participating in Our Unlearning Hour, contacted me about bringing his middle school and high school students. So we're creating a separate, dedicated tour for them later in October or November. So
The timing with Indigenous Peoples Day is perfect.
Not exactly planned out. I mean, it's a nice coincidence, and we had it on our radar, of course, But yeah, it's nice that the timing coincided. Mm-hmm.
It was a national day in Canada. Federal government, any federal agencies were closed, banks were closed. But here in Ontario, which is a province, the provincial premier did not bother to designate it a day of remembrance. And then at the very last minute was, yeah, I better attend some events. He looked very bad. He looked really, really bad. And the Prime Minister of Canada attended he was out in British Columbia and attended a ceremony out there. And he's really been the catalyst in Canada for getting this going. I think he was, politicians I tend to discount sometimes, but I think he was genuinely shocked to find out those graves had been discovered in Kelowna, BC. I think he was truly mortified to think that had happened. So.
And I think, one thing is one day, right? So I think what Indigenous communities have been advocating for is for a recognition that it's not just a day, right? That's kind of a little bit of a tokenizing thing. But and not just a month, but actually several years, right? of just sort of a constant recognition and integration of indigenous knowledges and practices and exchanges and that type of thing. So we have to look at it beyond just a single day, and yeah.
So a cultural shift.
I mean, we're talking about two separate days as well. I mean, just yesterday in Canada, and I think yesterday the Orange Shirt Day, like there hasn't been, as far as I know, any government recognition in the US. I don't know if Deb Haaland said anything or did anything. I'm not sure.
I don't know.
I didn't see anything
with that.
Yeah. I did see some things on Instagram that were trying to translate the messages, mainly to settlers, about what to do on this day to a US context as well.
Yep.
And also, PTU raised the gruesome findings, but like how to always be careful not to, always tie it to that, to the kind of news items that, that are re-traumatizing, and actually just, the very conditions of, anyway, sorry, Indigo, but like the very conditions of you being here are ground up with this, right? And so it's not something that happens in one place. It's ongoing. So yeah, it's really tough. And I felt so. I had a hard day yesterday, and that was only from a kind of a vague engagement, or engagement from my perspective. But I felt it was a very difficult day.
Yeah.
And I'm not going
I can add to it.
Yeah, I'm not. Yeah, I don't want to put you on the spot.
Oh, I'll add to that. So for, I guess, context too, so my grandfather survived Indian boarding schools out in Denver. So my tribe is Southern Ute. So our res is in Ignacio. And so he was taken from him and his older siblings. He was the youngest. He was 4 when he was taken to the boarding schools up in Denver, which, if you saw a map, is pretty far north, pretty far to the east. And his case would be a success story, because his other siblings were able to run away and they weren't able to bring him because he was so little and they didn't know how to take care of him. Is kind of the story that was told. So I think he had 3 older siblings, I think 2 sisters and 1 older brother. And so he went through the whole thing. So yeah, entered at age 4, stayed in, he called it the orphanage, is kind of what he knew it as. And then right when he turned 18 was when the Korean War started. So he went right into the Marines. And so he was really indoctrinated into assimilation pretty early. And the only thing that he conveyed to like my mom and my aunt and my uncle was that we're Ute, that were from Colorado, because that's where he went to college and got his degree in engineering and writing, and that we don't talk about anything else about it, and so that my mom told me that they went, or he took my mom and my aunt, because they're basically like Irish twins, so they're basically really close to each other. And when they were little, they went to where he thought the location of the school was, because he was trying to find it to find old classmates, but he never relayed anything that was like the trauma that happened. He was actually very positive about it, which could be all the way when you cope with trauma, but also being so little, that's what and also from what I've been able to find through some family members and us trying to find each other, we're all separated. So it's interesting. It's like, my family's in Ohio, right? So we're in Columbus, Ohio, and displaced. And it turns out all of my native side is still in Colorado or New Mexico or California. And so like, we're still around, but we cannot find each other because our names have changed. The name that they were given was Gonzalez, which is a very common name in that part of the country, right? So like trying to figure out what our actual family story is and why there was no connection from like his parents is kind of the thing we've been trying to understand. And my grandfather died in 2006 and I never got to meet him because he left the family early on from trauma and all that. But based on what my mom would share, because she was closest to him, was that he never called himself Native. He said we were Ute, but that he always thought he was Hawaiian because he liked how they looked and they looked like him. And so he thought Hawaii was like his brothers and sisters, which I think is so interesting. And so I've done a lot of work and through my mom and like my mixed heritage and understanding being displaced from my land, but also that not being my land, right? Like I wasn't born and raised in Colorado. I've only been there a couple times. I haven't been to the res. But that is still like my cultural understanding from my upbringing. Like I had a very Mexican Spanish upbringing. I spoke Spanish when I was little, completely disconnected now, but trying to figure out this like boarding school, like honorary day and like orange shirt and all that. There's like, it's a wound from my family and my one aspect of my culture experience that is weird to see everywhere. It's something that I think for a lot of Indigenous peoples in Turtle Island, where, and even of course, like Aboriginal stuff in Australia and all that, where it's like, it's something that's so deep within us that we almost keep within the community and have that be projected outwards. It's not like missing and murdered Indigenous women, you know, like where we're actually actively looking for these humans, you know, we're actually trying to find the bodies. With that, it's like our ancestors and they're dead, you know, like we're not looking for them. So it's like we are alive because they survived the best that they could. So it's a weird bringing up that old stuff when there's nothing we can do because it already happened. And with those who are the survivors, we're doing what we can now because of their sacrifice and what they had to do, you know? So it's a weird thing. Those are my 2 cents.
And that kind of emphasizes the idea that it's just, you know, one day just is token. I think you referred to it as tokenism, and it is, you know, it's like National Secretary's Day. It's like, we'll recognize for one day, but then what are we going to do about it? And, you know, and a settler colonist can take 2 approaches. You can say, well, you know what, we're going to move ahead, which is, well, I'm not sure what the word is, but it's blindered, or, you know, can actually attempt and never fully complete, but attempt to say, I can't believe I'm part of this. I can't believe, you know, this has happened. And that article that you had assigned last week, woman saying that I think her name was Nascimento, she was saying, well, if you're a white guy and white person and you're gonna cry about it, like, don't cry to me, cry to your therapist. It's like, it's almost like it's adding a burden to either an Indigenous or, you know, an African-American person to say, I'm really sorry. That's really too bad. And I'm very hard on the white settler who decides that he's going to say, I'm really sorry about what happened. It's like, sorry doesn't cut it. There has to be a cultural shift. And I'm not even sure what it looks like. I really don't know what it looks like. But saying sorry just seems so trite, at least to me. I don't know. And living here in Canada, you know, we've seen our share of atrocity as well, and hidden behind politicians who say, well, you know, we've got to move on. You know, we've had I don't know if you're aware of this or not, but the Canadian flag's been flying at half-mast since those graves were discovered. And all federal buildings have been at half-mast for quite some time. The reason being, there's a logic behind it. They expect we're going to find more. And one of the leaders of the opposition, you know, the other party said, oh, it's time to raise the flag. We got to move on. He lost the election. Partly because of that. You know, the insensitivity, the white settler. Well, come on, that was in the past. I don't know, and I don't have an answer for how we should conduct ourselves. I don't know how, as a white settler, I'm supposed to conduct myself. But saying sorry, it can't possibly be it. It's got to be more than that. Anyway, and that's my 2 cents.
So Indigo, kind of difficult to follow on the heels of Peter's statement, but I want to say first and foremost, what a powerful personal story, what an intimate experience, for your family. And that I am sorry, that your family has gone through this. And then maybe to problematize or extend that statement to say, how can we form spaces within this intimacy? How can we respect spaces, that belong to the community and to the families without sort of broadcasting them to the world? Where do we begin to think about trauma and processing, reconciliation? Yes, healing, for communities. How do we do that? How do we create these forums without falling into a framework of established recognition for certain, Indigenous Peoples' Days, or, Orange Shirt Day, or whatever it might be, right? To redefine those spaces, in ways that are sensitive and listening to the needs of Indigenous communities, especially when it comes to something so tragic and then also so recent, right? Because you as a descendant didn't necessarily experience it, but this is a really close time frame. We're not talking about 500 years. We're talking within the span of your family's experience. So I don't know. I just want to open it up, but I do think that a heartfelt, feeling of recognizing how difficult that was for your family is a first step, perhaps. Can you guide us a little bit in your thinking about kind of responding to what Peter is bringing up, and then how do we go about this, in a sensitive way?
Sure, yeah. And I mean, like, even Richard sent me like a text, with like the orange shirt, and just sending like, lots of love. And I've had other friends who do that too. And even some like former professors of mine who just learned about like what Orange Shirt Day was, or even about the boarding schools. And like even Namiko, she said that she told her son's school about it. And so now they're doing an Orange Shirt Day thing. And so it's like, even, I am one of so many. And the fact that that's able to spread is something that's really beautiful. And it's not a exploitation of the trauma. It's more, informing. And if those are wanting to honor it, then honor it, but not having those who are doing it out of obligation. I think that's the other thing too, is, some people, even with like the land acknowledgement stuff, I feel like some people do it because they have to be PC, but they're not doing it with the intent of why a lot of us do it when we're acknowledging the land. We're doing that as prayer, right? We're doing like, I am present on this space of this land. Just vocalizing it isn't doing it as prayer. That's causing more harm. It's doing more wounds to that where you are. So I mean, too, like with me being mixed, so like on my dad's side, so like my grandpa, descendant of slaves, pretty cut and dry, West Africa. And then my grandma was from St. Thomas, so Jamaica, and has some Haitian kind of background. And so there's also some indigeneity probably in there too, with the islands. And so it's kind of like also displaced from like my family's African heritage because of slavery, which is way more, of course, kind of standardized in the education of Turtle Island. And so and I'll also add too, like with my mom's mom, so my Nana, like her parents were immigrants from Spain and from Scotland. And so on my Scottish side, I have some Indigenous family there too, because we're all the way in the Sky Isle. And so it's like my lived experience of my beautiful parents coming together to have me as their only child, to be this mixed being, of story and history and trauma. And then me coming out and being, a queer person, being an artist, a medicine person, someone who loves academia, is trying to make sense of all these complex histories. And so when people have been supportive of my understanding of like my presence in the world, I've had to be very selective of who I talk to. I think a lot of people too, like they kind of either they're very performative and they want to like vocalize everything, bring up all the trauma because you think you have to, unveil it to have it be real, but you don't have to reveal it to have it still have impact, right? And so holding space for conversation can be like one way to do it, but having a conversation that really is for the intention of hearing someone else than just someone having talked to you and give you a pamphlet of what to do when you encounter this archetype is something that is in miscommunication right now. You know, even when I was like 10 years old, I was asked to speak in front of teachers at Pickerington because they want to know how to handle diversity issues. And I sat in a room in a classroom with like 15 teachers, and I'm just there and I'm just like, hello, you know, probably with the same haircut because I had short hair back then. And then they just asked me questions like, what does it mean? Oh, you don't really look Black. Who is your father? You know, like, oh, you're Native. What's this? And so I'm just like, and I just did it, you know, and I'm used to talking to teachers and having them learn from me in this weird experience, like power trip, right? And then they were very appreciative, but then I never got anything after. There was no like, here's a cookie. You know, there was no like, it was me vomiting my story, them walking away thinking that they checked the list to say that I met with someone of these cultures. And now I know how to help students who are like this. And so this honoring the responsibility of story, I think, is the big thing that if people call themselves allies or people who are woke or whatever can like learn what does that mean, because narrative is the basis of like indigenous belief system, right? Especially oral narrative. And then you add the visual and then you add all these other senses. Is like, will you cherish the story that I vocalized to you? And if you do, how can you share with me that you're doing it than telling my story through your mouth? You know, I don't want someone to tell the story of my grandfather to other people unless I ask them to, you know? And if I ask, which my mom used to do a lot because it was really hard because it was her dad. So a lot of times I would have to vocalize the story of my grandfather because it was too hard for her. And so that offering of, can you please do this for me, is such an intimate and vulnerable thing. But also it doesn't have to be through blood, it can be through someone you're in a kinship with. And so when you're sharing the narratives of groups of people, and especially when it comes to the specific family stories, then what are you doing as a responsible listener in that engagement? You know, and it's not going to be a lecture, it's not going to be a PowerPoint, you know, how can we make this be a tangible thing where it's like, I bring in teas and I bring in, you know, like sounds. And so you can hear the voice of my people as I tell you the story, so I'm not separated from them, because that's not how it is in my day-to-day experience. You know, I may not be listening to power music, but there's power music going on in my heart and in my mind because it's always there. So imagine that with people all over the world who have their cultural stories too, when you're engaging with them.
Yeah, I think that one, like what a ridiculous burden to place on a 10-year-old, right? And again, the idea of checking the box and giving you a cookie seems flippant, right? Just thinking about our role as academics and having to problematize this aspect of ventriloquy, right? Like speaking for someone else. I think that's definitely something that is important to take a look at. And then thinking about this idea of narratives, one of the things that I've sort of learned from working with communities in the Andes is that they actively, proactively reject deficiency cultures, right? Deficiency narratives that are imposed on them, sometimes with really good intentions, potentially, like NGOs that are coming in to help the poor people, you know, in the communities or something like this. But the communities actively reject this. Their narrative is one of empowerment, right? And self-determination. And I think that has caused me to turn to appreciative inquiry, where like kind of the gist of it is what you focus on is what will grow, right? And thinking about like that type of directing our gaze towards the things that work in the same way that communities reinforce the things that work. It's not that they sweep under the rug disagreements or problems in the community, but their narrative is one of empowerment. And in spite of that, the outside sort of representation continues to be one of problems and deficiencies and minority and, you know, like that type of thing, subaltern type of issues from that Western gaze. So just things that I would be interested in talking to you and to this group about in terms of problematizing and finding what our role is, you know, as academics and as white settlers.
I'll just say, Indigo, that it's so fun. Yeah. So I learned of your family story through your mother and through her an academic presentation and her work on her thesis. And so yesterday, while writing in relation to some of these, to this day on my blog, and specifically in relation to the color orange, because whenever I think of the color orange, I think of this one particular artwork by Michael Rakovich, who's an Iraqi American artist who did a project in Cleveland after the murder of Tamir Rice, based on the color orange, because it was the safety. The orange was the color of the safety on his gun and the toy gun. And so it was a community project to remove the color orange from the streets of Cleveland. And so to gather all the orange objects and put them in the gallery, like get them out of the space. And so whenever, I just can't think of that color without thinking of that project. So when Orange Shirt Day came, it was just like, and there are obvious kind of connections here, because the origins of the shirt were about the removal of that shirt. Like you can't have that shirt for one of the, so, so I've been in all that. And then, I sent you the message because I was like, I know this is you. And I know that this is this projection. And I know that there is a problem with always thinking of those relations in that space, like, so the idea of someone like me saying to the world, your story in relation to this day it's not right. At the same time, this back to Michelle's kind of, what do you want to grow? I just have a lot of gratitude that you're here. And I know that kind of so, it seems so like big, but it's like and heavy and that's, that I felt it that day, like that feeling of like, whatever this, there's a direct connection between the past and the present in that day, because we should celebrate that day because of what that it failed, to celebrate the failures of white genocide, like meaning the genocide conducted by white people, is something that needs to be celebrated by white people very much. That we're not part of that, and it failed, so we can be in this space together today. And I think that's the bottom line for me in this. And then we think about the space that we have here, and working with Indigo in this space, and working, with Anna in my class and in this space, and not turning to the Indigenous student to legitimate what we're doing is very important. But to know that they're here. And they're here, and that, so it's getting that balance, right? To know that you're here, but not expected to like lead the conversation because of what we're talking about. And I think that's the balance that we're like, that's not going to happen in one day, or with one, with the open house, or with the Unlearning Hour, or with the K'acha Willaykuna, or with Potify Tusi, or with, it's if we add all those things together, we're getting closer.
Well, maybe something that you bring up, Richard, brings up the discussion of sites versus contexts of commemoration. So one thing to put a sign on it or whatever and have that stand for the commemoration, versus bringing in practice into those contexts. When I think about days of commemoration, I feel the same way that it is with, big life events like funerals, right? Where you want the world to stop turning. And our practices can potentially do that, right? Like to some extent, it's, to just sort of stop the world from turning for a minute, just to sort of honor the power of those moments.
What's the origin of Orange Shirt Day in the United States? I know what it is in Canada. What is the significance of orange in Orange Shirt Day in the United States? Do you know what the genesis of it is?
No, it's the same. It's honoring the story of what's happened in Canada because it's happened here too, rather than having like a different color or anything. It was more of, we're all on Turtle Island, so we should all share that color together.
But then you are familiar then, I guess, with the origin of why it's Orange Shirt Day in Canada, which is the little girl. Yeah. Okay.
Right.
Yeah,
right.
Okay. Right.
Yep.
I have to tell you, I this year it really surprised me dealing with my students. I teach kids grade 4 to 8. I'm generally a grade 8 teacher, but the last couple of years I've been teaching a second language. And I was blown away at the number of students who, after all this time, had no idea about the story of the origin of Orange Shirt. And I think I was I was surprised that even my school board was saying things like, you want to wear orange on National Day of Truth and Reconciliation. It's like, no, not an orange hat, not an orange short, it's an orange shirt. And I was surprised at the number of people who just thought that it was a color, just a color. And I got to tell you, I found that kind of insulting. Really, you just think that somebody automatically picked orange as a color. And I was kind of aghast at that. And I felt a little bit guilty. So I spent all day yesterday reinforcing with every student in my classes, this is what is behind that color. And there were at least 25 students. I have 150 in the course of a day. And there were at least 25 students who had no clue. No clue. And, until we start being truly inclusive, and I'm not talking about the United States, but until Canada starts talking about the Indigenous people and them, and starts talking about one world, one Turtle Island, one species of human, no matter what they look like, we've got a long way to go. And I still hear too much about, we want to honor the Indigenous as if they're them. That drives me nutty. And there's another teacher that I work with who is completely incensed by this whole idea of the us and them. We're going to help them. You made that comment about, going, NGOs go and help them. I mean, did anybody not learn from Gandhi about, you feed a man for a day, give him a fish, teach him how to fish, you can feed him for a lifetime? Like, are we not going to be inclusive? Mm-hmm. I'm stunned by it. Mm-hmm. I don't think we've come very far in Canada.
Yeah, so I think there's a gamut, of feelings and issues, like ranging from incensed and reasonably so, right, to how do we frame our discourses in our classrooms, in our communities, so that those discourses are inclusive and have the buy-in, of a range of people. Because we've seen, in other contexts, how discourses that sort of lead to people feeling shamed or blamed, maybe going back to the article that we read last time, aren't necessarily generative. Like, they actually increase the distance, of that. So there are different mechanisms of getting people to pay attention. One of them might be of saying, I can't believe that you haven't heard this story, right? But another one might be to sort of bring them in as part of that story with different narrative strategies and different types of dialogue. I don't know, Indigo, what do you think about that? Because this is basically what we're talking about, right? Is how to create those dialogues that are productive and that are conducive to changes.
I'll speak briefly for the time since we're at the 12:30 mark, but essentially, I mean, I think one of the things that I've talked about a lot is when you talk to mixed people specifically, you're witnessing conversations of conflicts within them inherently, right? So there's a lot of conflict between the Indigenous communities and Black people, right? So I see that with my own family, I saw that with my grandpa, my father. So it's like, how did people on a day-to-day live with that conflict, which then you can like take some of those strategies to then apply them to a classroom setting or a community gathering of here's information that people may have different opinions on. How can we have a conversation with each other? And a lot of times, even with some of my mixed friends, we inherently become the peacekeeper because we're able to understand both perspectives of that. And me being two-spirit, I understand the gender spectrum, you know, with that too in conversation. And so it's like we have such lived experience on how to have that, we can kind of turn it into something that makes it applicable to different issues when you're having a conversation. Okay, theirs is a really intense topic. People are gonna have really strong opinions on something, and some people know more and not know enough, but how can you still have a harmonious conversation so everyone is learning in the room and can participate? And I always say, like, even when I would do my guest lectures, like there's really no stupid question. If you want to ask me about my opinions on Thanksgiving, I will answer it because I'm willing to take the time to do the unlearning with people. And I know some of my Indigenous like family or even like academic family, they don't have the patience to have the conversation with people who are just asking questions. But I know a lot of mixed peoples, because we're so used to having to talk to our different families and groups, like having to translate over and over again, like how to have that as an easier conversation than us versus them, because that doesn't exist for us because we are everybody, you know, when you're mixed. So that's kind of as brief as I can get it, but that's my advice on that.
Well, here we are at our hour. Thank you, Indigo, and Michelle and Peter. You know, that we've recorded this, and we can talk about if we, you know, want this available or not, and we can, and I'll talk to Indigo after this, and we can think about that. But thanks for joining us, Peter, from Toronto, and
well, thank you for letting me come in.
Yeah.
I like being included in this, and
Yeah.
you know, I can be academic, but this is an emotional issue for me as well.
Mhm.
You know, it's
Yeah.
something where almost my amygdala gets hijacked, you know, when I is it a flight or fight? And yeah, you know, having an indigenous daughter has wakened me up.
Yeah.
You know?
And Michelle, also thanks, you know, to, you know, the open house is, you know, it's a kind of lightning rod for a lot of these issues, right? It really is, and you're not shying away from them, and I think that that's so important. And there are easy fixes which are like not doing certain kind of activities, but you're staying with the complexity of it, and I think that that is another version of the staying within the mixed that Indigo is talking about too. So I have a lot of admiration for the work you do.
Yeah, more than me, the students are staying within. They're
Yeah.
raising these complexities and engaging them. So that's the exciting part. And Richard, I know we're past the time, but I did want to just sort of mention this has been a fruitful conversation for me, really enlightening, and leaves me again with a lot of things to think about over the course of the year, yes, and of the day and of the week. But I did want to mention Kay and Vera's COVID supplement, because that also sort of seems to connect here, and the fact that you're in that space of not just sort of saying, okay, they did this piece, and maybe we can talk about it next time or whatever. But
well, actually, Indigo and I did talk about that. We need to have a longer, more focused conversation on this. And I mean, this is the I've got it here. This is the newspaper that was created by this community in Brazil that was focused on racism. And K'acha Willaykuna, in collaboration with Potufai Tautusi and Columbus Printed Arts, requested a kind of COVID update from the same community. And we have a responsibility. We've edited it. We had it translated, thanks to Isis, into English from Portuguese and Guarani. And we're going to be distributing it. But we also need to make space for a kind of, you know, even the act of reading it, I think, literally. I mean, you know, taking time to read the testimonies and the statements of members of this community in relation to racism and COVID, and how they intersect. And so, yes, we need to, I think within the Potufai Tautusi project, it has had a place, but hasn't come to kind of real consciousness of what we're doing. And we are supporting that community with material donation, which I think is very important too. And we're not asking anything from them except the report. At the same time, I think, we have, a bit like with the Cassandra press reader, we have a kind of responsibility to show that we are connecting and thinking through things. So yeah, we need a separate space for this, I think, Michelle. We need to like either devote one of our unlearning hours to it. Indigo and I were going to bring it up on the radio show at some point too, as well. And so I think we'll find different platforms for doing that. I'm bringing these to my class, both of my classes for next week. So I'll start that role too. But thank you for raising that, Michelle. Okay, happy Friday. My son turns 12 on Sunday, so I'm going to celebrate Eneko's birthday. Yeah, so happy birthday, Eneko, if you ever watch this in the future. Take care, everyone.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Have a great week. Bye-bye.